Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Mitzi Chang, who's a corporate partner at Goodwin. Mitzi, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard.
So, Mitzi, I've known you for many, many years, and it's great to finally have you on. I'd like to start just by asking you, why you went to law school in the first place.
So I think I had always wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, frankly, I grew up in the 80s. I watched LA Law. And I think, from a very young age, I thought, I think I could be a lawyer. When I was in college, I sort of toyed around with maybe different careers, but I think at the end of the day, law school was always a draw. So that's really why I went to law school.
And did you like it? What did you think of law school when you got there?
So I did enjoy it. I actually think it's a little funny because I think what I do today is in a lot of ways almost like a law school exam every day in terms of how I approach some of the really complicated questions that I deal with clients. But I would say back then I certainly did not love the Socratic method. But I think it was a really fun experience. I lived on the East Coast for 3 years. I'm from California, so that was great, and I'm really glad that I did that.
And how did you decide? I mean, you're obviously a transactional lawyer. How did you decide between litigation and transactional, or was that much of a question? I mean, if you watched LA Law, most of those lawyers are litigators typically,
Yes. Well, my husband is also a litigator, so I think there's also a lot of exciting, things that happen in a courtroom. But for me, I think it was just, when I did my first moot court experience in law school, I realized that is not for me. But I have always really been drawn to, sort of coming to an answer together, right? Whether it's through negotiations and sort of teamwork and being collaborative. And for me, in terms of my personality, I always thought that was a better fit.
So how did you get back to the West Coast and into your sort of tech practice now, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so I summered at a law firm in San Francisco, and it was a sort of big corporate practice. I spent 3 years at Latham & Watkins, and then for me, I actually wanted to go in house after several years. I felt that I wanted to see the business side, and I was lucky enough to get a job in house. And I actually, a funny story, back when Craigslist was still a legitimate sort of, place to find a job, I found a job on Craigslist
Really?
for a company called CNET Networks, which doesn't exist today. But it was a digital media, sort of web company that was public. I did a lot of work with public companies. And for me, it was just super exciting to, work in the tech sector, sort of being in the thick of it. And it was a very sort of youthful, young, vibrant company. And I learned a lot about how to be an in-house lawyer, right? How to really give advice to business people that they could use and understand.
And how did you compare that with being an outside lawyer? What was it, how do you compare the two now that you've sort of done both?
Yeah, I mean, I think, being an outside lawyer, you do get to see sort of maybe more larger strategic transactions. You certainly don't get to work on maybe the day-to-day stuff that an in-house lawyer does. So for me, as an outside lawyer, I sort of look at it as, they're coming to me because they have a question that they can't otherwise answer. And so, you want to be able to distill down that business sort of judgment and also, your advice so that they can sort of use that and figure out which way they want to go. And I think it is a skill because I think, without being in-house, I wouldn't have necessarily have known, this is what I need as an in-house lawyer, right? I need to sort of get advice from outside counsel, sort of distill it down for my business clients, right? My internal clients, and be able to use that. So I really do try to do that as part of my daily practice.
So what drew you back to outside law firm? Sounds like you had a great experience in-house. You were at a couple of great companies. What drew you back to being in a law firm?
Yeah. I had a great time. It was really fun. I was really happy to have that experience in-house because I think it's been very valuable. But it was sort of, we had just gotten acquired by CBS Corporation. So, the company that I was at is now called CBS Interactive. And we're no longer a publicly traded company, right? We were a subsidiary of a much larger corporation. And so for me, I was sort of thinking about, next steps, where do I sort of go from here? Do I want to stay? Do I want to look at, different things? And it was right during, I was interviewing sort of right about 2000, sort of right when the downturn occurred in 2008. And my favorite sort of supervisor at my prior firm had just moved to Goodwin, and he convinced me to interview. And I thought, oh, I'm never going back to a law firm. But I interviewed, and, I really liked the people. And I thought, well, this could be a really great opportunity. It's, would sort of open a lot of different doors. Maybe it's time for something new. And that was really the reason why I left.
And what is your practice? Describe your practice now today and how it's evolved from there. Because obviously you're starting from ground zero, presumably, when you came in-house. Tell me how it's evolved and where it is today.
Sure. So I would probably describe myself as a life cycle lawyer. So I represent, founders with an idea. I help their companies get finance. I represent VC investors. I sort of take them through that life cycle of a company, whether it's through an M&A exit or an IPO and beyond. And I would say for the last, several years now, so my client base has mostly been tech companies. But for the last, several years, I've really been focused on blockchain, crypto, and fintech companies. So I would say I have a subject matter expertise in that area.
Oh, interesting.
And it's been super fun, really innovative. And that's one of the reasons why, I continue to do this. I think it's been very, just in terms of intellectually stimulating and, like a law school exam every day.
Well, we may have to do a separate podcast on blockchain because that is a topic that's of interest, but we'll probably cover that another time. So tell me a little bit about, so after having been in private practice and then in-house and back to private practice, do you find yourself liking one over the other, or they're really just different?
I think it's different. I mean, I have certainly had the opportunities to consider, going back in house, like a lot of, sort of outside counsel.
Of course.
I think at the end of the day, for me, being at a law firm, you do get to see the most diverse, sort of cutting edge, innovative transactions. And that for me is, really fun. And, maybe one day I'll get tired of that, or maybe there will be a company where, I also get to see that. But for me, that's one of the reasons why I stay.
Talk a little bit about how your in-house experience you think helps you become a better outside counsel. I mean, tell me a little bit about how does that help you, compared to someone who's never been in-house.
Yeah. So when I went in-house, I was part of a pretty small legal team that had, like most companies, fairly slim budget. They're hiring lawyers who had law firm expertise, so that they, don't have to pay, sort of the fees of outside counsel. So when we sort of were thinking about, well, when do you go to outside counsel? It's when you sort of can't figure it out on your own, when it's, a big issue. But a lot of times you, as inside counsel, you are dealing with so many different issues, and you may not really know much about those issues. You sort of have to figure it out on the fly. And you're also providing advice, in my case, right, to software engineers, to marketing people, to, not just the business and finance people that maybe a lot of outside counsel, may have experience with on a daily basis at a firm, but junior people, sort of people who don't really understand the role of a lawyer. And so for me, it was always trying to figure out how do I make them understand, right, what the risk and reward, how do I, explain to them, this is how we're looking at things, right? Here are the various alternatives that you could choose. And so I think that, and I was pretty junior at the time, right? I was probably like a mid-level associate, sort of level when I went in-house. And I think that sort of experience of really trying to bridge like legalese, like a lot of times, we're trying, as outside counsel, right? You're trying to give them the perfect advice. There's, some, sort of CYA coverage on making sure you're sort of talking about all the caveats. But I think as inside counsel, you really just want to give your client base the best sort of business advice that you can. You want to be the trusted legal advisor. Also on sort of when you're outside counsel. So for me, I sort of took that experience now, and I think it's very helpful because I do work with a lot of startups. So it's not, your super sophisticated, CFO who's been there for 25 years, right? These are folks who are coming out of college, maybe not even college, on their first startup, and really trying to give them that advice that they understand in a way that's understandable, that is approachable, that they can use.
Do you think clients notice that you've been in-house, or the kinds of questions you ask? Do you think they think, oh, this is somebody who, was in-house or something like that? Or what do you think?
I mean, I don't know that I've ever gotten that comment. I do get some comments that, they think that my advice is sort of easy to understand, which is great. And it really does depend on your audience, right? So, if you are obviously advising a board of directors of a publicly traded company, that is going to be, your presentation and your advice and how you come off may be different than if you're advising a first-time founder.
Now, you said you work with obviously all stages of companies, public down to small startups. Do you have like a preference on which ones, which end of that spectrum you like to be on better?
So I have always loved a diversity of practice. And for me, that's what makes my day-to-day fun. I don't do the same thing twice. It's always just a myriad of different types of companies, investors, or sort of operating companies, and different questions that come up, different transactions. So that's what I enjoy. I do get a little bored if I'm doing the same thing all the time. So this is probably why my practice is sort of a little bit eclectic, but it's fun.
Well, and if you do like the diversity and the variety, then obviously being an outside counsel does afford you that, because obviously when you're in-house, you're working with one, whether it's a startup or a big company, but you only get that as opposed to the variety that you get now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, obviously you said you don't know if you'll do something else. If you could imagine a job that would really be interesting, I mean, would that be, the GC of a startup? Would it be a venture capitalist? Could you see, is there something that you could see yourself that might, actually draw you to do something else at some point in the future?
It's a great question. I still have many, many years left of, working. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to consider other things. But for now, I think for me, just sort of like that intellectual challenge has been really fun. I really like working in particularly the industry that I'm in now, right? It's very innovative. We're dealing with challenging questions that are not easy to answer. And certainly that's not always in a law firm, but I think a law firm is a sort of easy way to get to that sort of place. So who knows? I keep my mind open.
Tell me quickly how you got into the blockchain space. I mean, was that accidental, or were you really trying to focus on that?
I would say it's probably a little accidental. One of my partners at Goodwin, who is a litigator and also co-chair of the blockchain practice with me, asked me several years ago if I, could help him on the corporate side for a client who is in the blockchain space. And, I just found it to be fascinating in terms of what they were doing. And, really thought about, wow, this is like something new, innovative. I've never seen it before. And I probably dug myself in a rabbit hole as I was trying to learn about it. But, that was sort of the first of, many clients. So I would say it was a little fortuitous, right? That I was sort of right place, right time. But I think the way that, my personality is, the way that sort of like to approach problems, it sort of was a great fit for me. In terms of my background, right? I'm a corporate securities lawyer. A lot of the issues were with respect to, securities laws. And so for me, it really was a natural fit, and one that I found to be really interesting.
Well, Mitzi, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I'm so appreciative that you came on to chat with me. I've always enjoyed your enthusiasm and your interest and love of the legal practice, which is why I do these interviews. And of course, if you do decide to find something else, or you do run into that wonderful job, please come back and tell me about it.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's a pleasure.
This is Richard Hsu and Mitzi Chang. Thanks.